At 14:32 on a sweltering afternoon in July 1943, deep in the dust-choked fields of Sicily, Private Samuel Kerrigan, a 19-year-old rookie machine gunner with the U.S. 45th Infantry Division, knelt behind a battered M1919 Browning, sweating so much he could barely keep his eyes clear. Enemy fire whipped across the wheat rows, snapping stalks inches above his helmet. His squad was pinned, their advance stalled by a German M34 dug into a stone terrace overlooking the valley. Kerrigan's heart hammered. He had fired the M1919 only once at training, and right now the weapon had jammed. The gun refused to cycle. The bolt stuck. The belt feed sagged. Every second the Browning stayed silent. The German machine gun chewed up more ground around his squad's position. The squad leader shouted over the chaos, "Clear that jam, Kerrigan. We're dead without you." Kerrigan tried, hands shaking, sweat stinging his eyes. The extractor claw wouldn't grab. The belt misaligned. The feed tray felt warped, under fire and under pressure. His movements turned clumsy. He wasn't fast enough. He wasn't skilled enough. He wasn't ready for this. Then something changed. A mortar exploded behind the German position, throwing a shockwave through the valley. Dust and pebbles cascaded off the rocks around Kerrigan. The Browning jolted, just slightly, like the weapon had inhaled. Kerrigan instinctively slapped the top cover down, hit the charging handle, and squeezed the trigger. The M1919 roared to life. One burst, just one, cut perfectly across the slope, striking the German machine gun team at the exact moment they lifted their weapon to reposition. The timing was impossible, miraculous. A fraction of a second later, the enemy gun fell silent. Its crew sprawled across the terrace. Kerrigan stared at the Browning in disbelief. He hadn't planned the shot. He wasn't sure he had even aimed properly. But that single impossible burst had saved the entire squad. What Samuel Kerrigan didn't know yet was at this moment, this one lucky, terrifying, perfectly timed shot was only the opening act to the most harrowing 40 minutes of his life. Kerrigan didn't feel relief. Not yet. Not even after the MG-34 fell silent. The echo of his own gunfire was still rolling through the valley when Staff Sergeant Hanley slapped his helmet and shouted, "Don't just stare. Skim left." They had support. Kerrigan jerked back to reality. His fingers hovered over the smoking receiver of the M1919, half expecting it to jam again at any moment. The weapon still felt wrong, sluggish on recoil, the charging handle vibrating in a way he didn't recognize. But it had fired. By some miracle, it had fired. He pulled the Browning back into position as the squad pushed forward through the wheat, moving in low, staggered lines. The air smelled of sun-baked dust, cordite, and the sour bite of burning brush. Kerrigan crawled along the dry furrows, dragging the tripod-mounted gun by its carry handle, every step heavy with dread. Then came the first warning. A sharp crack snap of rifle fire ricocheted off the stones ahead. German marksmen, more than one. Hanley threw up a fist. Down. The squad dropped instantly. Kerrigan pressed himself into the dirt, scanning the terrace above. The landscape rose in crooked steps. Stone walls built by farmers long before the war, now turned into perfect defensive platforms. Movement flickered behind a jagged rise, too quick to identify. And then he saw it, an MG-42 nest, higher than the last, concealed under a collapsed wooden shed. The crew was fast, already prepping the bipod, already feeding the belt. Kerrigan's breath stopped. The M1919 rattled weakly as he set it onto its tripod. His hands shook. He hadn't fixed the jam. He'd gotten lucky once. That wasn't the same thing. He flipped open the feed tray. 2 links were bent. The belt had dirt smeared through the grooves. One primer was dented, but hadn't fired. The Browning should have been dead. Hanley crawled beside him, face streaked with dust and sweat. "You seeing that 42? Kerrigan nodded. "Why, yeah." "Good. You have 5 seconds." Kerrigan blinked. 5 seconds for what? To stop it before it stops us. Up on the ridge, the German crew snapped the cover of their MG-42 shut. One gunner slapped the receiver. Another shouted something sharp in German. Kerrigan slammed the M1919's top cover closed, yanked the charging handle. It stuck halfway. Panic flared in his chest. He pulled again, harder, feeling the mechanism grind like sandpaper. The bolt scraped forward, not smoothly, not reliably, but forward. Kerrigan, Hanley hissed. The MG-42 gunner swung the barrel toward the squad's position. Kerrigan saw the metallic glint of the barrel shroud. The assistant gunner raised the belt. Kerrigan squeezed the trigger. Nothing happened, just a hollow click. His stomach flipped. He slapped the side plate, something an instructor had explicitly told him never to do, and squeezed again, for half a second. The M1919 did nothing. Then, with a metallic shank, the belt snapped into alignment. The Browning coughed again, and then it roared. The recoil sent dust flying from the tripod legs. Kerrigan's burst stitched across the terrace just as the MG-42 opened fire. Their rounds shredded the wheat above his squad's heads. His rounds tore into their firing line. The enemy tracers died midstream. The 42 went silent. Hanley clapped Kerrigan's shoulder. Good. Now get up. That wasn't their main nest. Kerrigan stared at him, panting. What? How do you know? Hanley pointed toward the hillside beyond the terrace. A third line of stone walls. Higher, longer, wider firing arcs. And something heavy, very heavy, scraped against rock. Kerrigan felt the sound before he understood it. A German heavy machine gun, likely an MG-34, on a Lafette tripod. Long range, high accuracy. And it was positioning to fire on their entire company's flank. Kerrigan swallowed hard. His weapon was unreliable. His belt was dirty. His hands shook with every breath. But he was the only gunner close enough to stop what was coming. And the next 40 minutes would push him and his jury-rigged, half-broken Browning far beyond the edge of fear. Kerrigan's heartbeat thudded louder than the gunfire. He dragged the Browning forward through the wheat. Every inch a battle against dust, heat, and the gnawing dread that the weapon would betray him the moment he needed it most. The ground rose gently toward the second terrace, just enough slope to expose anyone who tried to crest it. Hanley crawled beside him, pointing with two fingers. There, see the shadow under that stone lip? Kerrigan squinted. At first he saw nothing, just layered rock and clumps of brittle grass. Then a faint metallic shimmer caught his eye. A barrel, long thicker than the MG-42 he had just silenced. MG-34 on tripod, Hanley muttered. High mount. They're setting up for plunging fire. Kerrigan felt his stomach clench. Plunging fire meant they'd rake the entire valley from above. His squad, the platoon behind them, the wounded they'd left in the rear. It would all be a killing zone. Why aren't they firing yet? Kerrigan whispered. Hanley swallowed. Because they're waiting for us to move. They want a better target picture. The German crew knew exactly what they were doing. Kerrigan set the M1919 behind a sparse patch of wheat. Barely concealment at all. He checked the feed tray again. Dust everywhere. Bent links. The receiver felt hot even though he'd fired only a few bursts. He knew the truth. The Browning was near the edge of failure. One bad round, one malformed link, and the gun would jam hard. The German MG-34 crew finished locking their tripod. Then came the sound Kerrigan dreaded most. A metallic clack as the German gunner seated the belt. Hanley hissed, "Get ready." The enemy gunner eased behind the optic sight. This was a full Lafette mount, one built for precision. German doctrine favored measured bursts at long range, and this ridge gave them ideal overlap against the American line. Kerrigan yanked the charging handle. It stopped. Hard. His breath froze. He tried again. Nothing. Hanley's voice sharpened. Kerrigan now. Before that, the German MG-34 fired. A perfectly controlled burst tore the wheat in front of Kerrigan flat to the soil. Dirt sprayed his face. Another burst stitched left, forcing Hanley to crawl backward under choking dust. Kerrigan's fingers trembled over the charging handle. He pulled, hard enough to bruise his palm. No movement. The bolt was jammed, worse than before. He slammed the side plate with his palm, once, twice, then ripped open the feed tray in pure panic. The belt had twisted. A single round, dented, scarred, had wedged itself sideways in the guide. The German MG fired again, longer this time. Riflemen screamed behind him. The platoon was being shredded. Kerrigan's world narrowed. He grabbed the bent round with 2 fingers, burned them, cursed, forced the cartridge free with a violent jerk. Another MG burst tore past, close enough that Kerrigan felt the air snap against his cheek. He slammed the feed tray shut, pulled the charging handle with everything he had. Chunk. The bolt slid forward. Hanley's voice cracked through the smoke. Shoot, Kerrigan. Shoot. Kerrigan didn't aim. He didn't breathe. He didn't think. He squeezed the trigger. The M1919 let out a harsh, mechanical roar and immediately jammed. 1 round fired. 1. But that round struck the exact stone lip where the MG-34 crew had braced their tripod, spraying shards of limestone into the gunner's face. The German gunner recoiled, falling backwards, their belt slipping free. Hanley bolted forward. Again. Cleared again. Kerrigan racked the charging handle instinctively. The bolt cycled barely. He slammed the trigger again. This time the Browning fired 3 rounds, choppy, uneven, angry bursts. But one hit the tripod's elevation arm. The MG-34 dipped. The German assistant gunner lunged to correct it, and Kerrigan's 4th round hit him square in the shoulder, spinning him violently aside. The 34 whined as its barrel slewed upward uselessly. Hanley's squad surged forward, rifles barking, closing the distance. Kerrigan kept firing, coaxing life from his failing weapon, one stuttering burst at a time. The Germans broke, pulling back over the ridge as the Americans took the terrace in a storm of dust and shouting. Kerrigan collapsed behind the Browning, panting, the gun smoking like a dying engine. Hanley knelt beside him. "You're not done," he said quietly. "There's one more nest, higher than this, and bigger." Kerrigan stared at him, eyes wide. "Bigger? How?" Hanley pointed toward a cluster of ancient stone pillars on the 3rd ridge. "That's not an MG-34 up there. That's an MG-08, water-cooled, First World War relic, but accurate as hell. They can hose the entire valley." Kerrigan swallowed, hard. His Browning was dying. Its belt was filthy. His luck was stretched thin. But he was the only machine gunner close enough to stop the MG-08 before it tore the entire battalion's flank apart. And he had less than 2 minutes before the Germans got it fully cooled, fed, and braced to fire. The 3rd ridge loomed above Kerrigan like a stone fortress, tall, jagged, and crowned with centuries-old columns from some forgotten farmhouse. Smoke drifted lazily across its crest, tinted orange by the Sicilian sun. Somewhere up there, behind those broken pillars, the German MG-08 team was preparing a killing field. Kerrigan knew the weapon by reputation. A water-cooled machine gun. Heavy, relentless, rhythmically smooth, with almost no climb. A weapon older than his father, but still deadly when dug in at elevation. Hanley tapped his shoulder and pointed toward a shallow ravine to their right. "That's your out," he said. "Gets you close enough to angle a shot. But once you crest that outcrop..." "I'm exposed," Kerrigan finished. Wide open. Kerrigan nodded, heart hammering. His M1919 felt heavier than ever. Each step a reminder of the gun's failing health. The receiver radiated heat through his gloves. The belt sagged, dragging clumps of dirt. The charging handle already felt stiff again. He crawled into the ravine, the walls rising around him like a dusty throat. Pebbles broke loose under his boots, skittering down the slope. Above, he heard muffled German voices, calm, coordinated, professional. Machine gun crew commands, range adjustments, water jacket checks. They were minutes, maybe seconds, from opening fire. Kerrigan reached the final bend in the ravine. One more rise, then he'd have line of sight. He set the Browning onto the rocks. His hands shook. He flipped open the feed tray. The belt was filthy, link stiff, the extractor claw worn to a sickle shape. The barrel, already hot, shimmered in the heat like a mirage. "Come on," he whispered. "Just once more, please." He pulled the charging handle, slow, steady, trying not to scrape the internals. The bolt stuck. Again, he closed his eyes, swallowing panic. Not now, not now. He tried again, bracing with both hands. The mechanism groaned like metal die. Then, chunk. The bolt slid into battery. He exhaled sharply. He dragged the M1919 to the ravine's lip, and rose into firing position. The ridge opened before him, sunlit stone, broken pillars, and the hulking silhouette of the MG-08 crouched on its sled mount. The German crew, for men, worked fast, gunner sighting in, assistant feeding a cloth belt, another soldier pumping water into the cooling jacket, the last scanning downhill with binoculars. They hadn't seen him yet. Kerrigan planted the M1919's bipod against the rocky lip. He sighted in, barely able to steady the jitter of his hands. He knew the truth. The Browning would give him one reliable burst, maybe two. After that, the jam would be catastrophic. He had to choose the perfect moment. Below, Hanley's squad shifted left, unknowingly entering the MG-08's field of fire. Kerrigan's pulse spiked. The German gunner adjusted his aim, angling slightly downward, toward Hanley's men. Kerrigan tightened his grip on the spade grips. He drew a breath, held it, but there was a problem, just as he prepared to fire. A gust of wind kicked dust into his eyes. He blinked, instinctively lowering his head. A split-second movement, but enough for the German observer to spot the glint of his Browning's barrel. "Kugel," the observer shouted. The MG-08 swung toward Kerrigan. He didn't think, didn't aim, didn't pray. He squeezed the trigger. The M1919 roared, not in smooth bursts, but in a violent staccato, coughing out uneven fire like a wounded animal. Brass casings spit erratically. The belt fed crookedly. Smoke poured from a receiver, but the rounds flew true. His first burst shattered the MG-08's water jacket, sending boiling water spraying over the German crew. The gunner screamed, stumbling backward. The assistant gunner tried to swing the gun back toward Kerrigan, but the damaged cooling shroud threw the weapon off balance. Kerrigan fired again. A hard jam slammed the Browning silent, but not before 3 rounds struck the sled mount's right leg, snapping the riveted brace clean off. The MG-08 toppled sideways, clattering across the stone like a fallen anvil. Hanley's squad surged up the ridge, rifles firing. The German crew scattered, but one of them, the gunner, lunged for a Panzerfaust, leaning against a pillar. He shouldered it, aiming downhill at the Americans. Kerrigan saw it. He had no ammo left in the first belt. The Browning was locked, jammed beyond field clearing. His pistol was too far to reach. He grabbed the Browning's smoking receiver with both hands, ripped the tripod loose, and lifted the entire weapon, barrel, receiver, and all, like a steel battering ram. He charged up the ridge. The German gunner turned, surprised, fired the Panzerfaust. But Kerrigan was already moving. The rocket whooshed past, missing by inches, as Kerrigan swung the entire Browning like a club, smashing the Panzerfaust operator to the ground. The rocket exploded harmlessly against the far slope. Hanley's squad overran the ridge seconds later. The MG-08 was destroyed. The German heavy position collapsed. Kerrigan fell to his knees, chest heaving, the Browning clattering to the stone beside him like a dead animal. Hanley approached, staring. "You," he said slowly, "are not a rookie anymore." But the battle wasn't over. Mortar fire echoed from the next valley. A German counterattack was forming, and Kerrigan, weapon ruined, hands burned, belt nearly empty, would have one last role to play before the day was done. Kerrigan crouched beside the ruined Browning, chest heaving, lungs burning. His ears rang from the Panzerfaust blast. The M1919 lay smoking on the stone beside him. Bent tripod, warped barrel shroud. Feed tray warped open like a broken jaw. The gun was finished. Below the ridge, Hanley's squad regrouped, checking ammo, resetting positions, calling out for casualties. The valley was eerily quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that didn't mean safety, but preparation. Hanley reached the ridge and knelt beside Kerrigan. "You hurt?" Kerrigan flexed his burned hands. "I'll live." "Good, because we're not done." Kerrigan followed Hanley's gaze down the far side of the ridge, and his stomach twisted. A German counterattack was forming in the next valley, fast. A mix of infantry and at least one light half-track creeping along the olive grove. A platoon's worth, maybe more, advancing toward their exposed flank. If they reached the terraces, they'd overrun the Americans, who were still consolidating on the lower slopes. Hanley pointed at the remnants of the MG-08 nest. That gun is scrap for the belt is good. Kerrigan blinked. The cloth belt. Exactly. And that ammo feeds? Kerrigan's eyes widened. The ZB-26, he said softly. A Czech-made light machine gun the Germans used widely. Reliable, accurate, magazine-fed. But some troops rigged adapters for belt feeds in static positions. And sure enough, among the collapsed stonework and scattered gear, Kerrigan spotted one. A ZB-26 half buried in dust, with an improvised feed chute attached. Hanley clapped him on the shoulder. Forward company needs a gunner up there. You're the only one close enough. Kerrigan didn't argue, didn't question, didn't doubt anymore. He scrambled across the rocks to the ZB-26, tossed aside the damaged top cover, checked the bolt, racked it hard, smooth, clean, then dragged the MG-08's cloth belt toward him. It wasn't a perfect fit, but someone, probably the now-dead German crew, had already trimmed and reinforced the belt's leading end. He seated it, fed it, charged the weapon. The ZB clicked into readiness with a satisfying, almost reassuring clack. Hanley pointed down the valley. They're coming. Set up here. Buy us time. Kerrigan dug in behind a natural stone depression, bracing the ZB-26 against a cracked pillar. Through the smoke and heat shimmer, he watched German infantry advance in dispersed lines, disciplined, methodical, closing fast. He waited, held his breath, judged the wind, the distance, the angle. At 140 yards, the first German NCO raised binoculars. Kerrigan fired. The ZB-26 barked, clean, smooth, rhythmic. A completely different world from a coughing, dying M1919. The German NCO fell instantly. The formation scattered, diving behind rocks and low walls. Kerrigan adjusted fire, controlled bursts, precise, deliberate. Every mistake he'd made with the Browning, every jam, every flinch, every moment of hesitation, seemed to burn away in those minutes. He felt the weapon's rhythm aligning with his breathing, his heartbeat, his will. The counterattack stalled. German riflemen tried to flank, cut down. The half-track angled its MG toward him. Kerrigan stitched the front tire, forcing it sideways into a ditch. Two machine gunners crawled forward with an MG-34. Kerrigan shattered their cover with a burst that tore the stone apart. The valley fight lasted 9 minutes. Kerrigan fired until the ZB's barrel smoked and the cloth belt sagged empty. By then, the Germans were retreating, dragging wounded, stumbling between olive trunks, disappearing back into the distant hills. Silence returned. Hanley climbed the ridge, breathing hard. You saved the whole damn flank, he said quietly. Again, Kerrigan lowered the ZB-26, hands trembling, but not from fear, from realization. He had come up the ridge as a rookie relying on luck. He stood here now as something else entirely. A gunner who had survived failure, faced panic, pushed through doubt, and found in the fiercest minutes of his life exactly who he was meant to be. When the fighting finally died down, the Sicilian ridge lay scattered with shattered stone, burnt wheat, and the tangled metal of 3 machine guns, German and American alike. The air shimmered with heat. Dust drifted like smoke. And in the middle of it all, Private Samuel Kerrigan sat on a broken pillar, elbows on his knees, staring at his scorched, blackened hands. The medics who reached him expected shock, or panic, or trembling. What they found instead was quiet disbelief. Not at the carnage, not at the near misses, not at the bodies on the terraces, but at the simple, impossible truth. He had done it. He had actually done it. The platoon's after-action report would later record the sequence in dry, technical language. Machine gunner Kerrigan neutralized 3 successive enemy MG positions under extreme weapon malfunction conditions, preventing enfilading fire on the battalion's right flank. It didn't mention that his Browning had been so damaged it should have failed the moment he touched the trigger. It didn't mention that each of his successful bursts, each miracle of timing, came from a weapon on the edge of catastrophic jam. It didn't mention the Panzerfaust that nearly vaporized him, nor the charge he made up the ridge carrying a 32-pound machine gun like a battering ram. Those details lived only in the memories of the men around him. Men who would never forget the rookie gunner whose bad luck weapon fired only when it absolutely had to. Kerrigan stayed with the 45th Infantry Division through the rest of the Sicilian campaign and into Italy. He became the company's most trusted gunner, a man whose instincts sharpened quickly and whose steadiness under fire surprised even him. After the war, he rarely discussed Sicily, but when pressed, he'd shrug and say, "I was scared. The gun was broken. I did what I had to." Today, the story survives mostly in platoon memoirs, faded letters, and a handful of eyewitness testimonies. Yet among historians and machine gun enthusiasts, the Kerrigan incident is sometimes cited as a rare example of how battlefield chaos, mechanical failure, timing, terrain, and sheer will can collide to create one perfect moment that changes everything. One jammed gun, one impossible burst, one rookie who refused to fold. If this story moved you, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps keep these long-form historical war stories alive. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if anyone in your family ever served as a gunner or in World War II. And if you want more cinematic, deeply researched war stories, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.